The newsroom buzzed with its usual chaos, the clack of keyboards, ringing phones, and muffled conversations forming a background hum that I had come to find comforting. I sat at my desk, scanning through an email that had landed just minutes before. The sender was anonymous, but the subject line was impossible to ignore: $50M operation inside Arcadia Corp, urgent. My curiosity piqued, but I kept my cool. After 6 years as an investigative journalist, I knew better than to get swept up in every tip that crossed my inbox. Still, the initial details hinted at something massive. The kind of story that could either make a career or get you fired, or worse. Arcadia Corp was no small fish. They were a powerhouse in the tech industry, a household name with tentacles in everything from AI development to government contracts. The company had a reputation for innovation and philanthropy, carefully curated by a glossy PR machine that made them untouchable in the public eye. But beneath that polished surface, I'd heard whispers, quiet rumors of financial irregularities, off-the-books deals, and deep pockets shielding questionable activities. Nothing concrete, just the kind of murmurs that kept investigative reporters awake at night. The tip promised a glimpse behind the curtain, a chance to break open a story no one else dared touch. I printed the email and slid it into my folder labeled Arcadia. My routine was methodical: verify, cross-check, and corroborate before making a move. But even as I tried to keep my enthusiasm in check, a flicker of excitement stirred. This was the kind of lead I lived for. That afternoon, I reached out to a contact at a regulatory agency, someone who had previously tipped me off about corporate misconduct. The conversation was terse. She warned me to tread carefully. Arcadia's influence runs deep, she said. You don't want them coming after you before you have solid proof. Her words didn't scare me, they sharpened my focus. Within days, the investigation had me piecing together fragments, unusual accounting entries, shell companies with names that sounded like bad sci-fi, and financial transfers that didn't add up. But the real breakthrough came when I managed to connect with a former Arcadia employee. She was nervous, her voice trembling over the phone as she described a clandestine operation funneling millions through offshore accounts. She insisted she had documents that would blow the lid off the whole scheme, but getting them would be risky. As I dug deeper, I started noticing small but unsettling changes around me. Emails from unknown senders, vague warnings cloaked in corporate jargon, and subtle attempts to discredit my work began to surface. One morning, my phone rang with a blocked number. I answered cautiously. "Jordan, you should drop this. It's not worth it," a distorted voice warned before hanging up. I wasn't naive, threats were part of the territory. But these felt different, calculated and chilling in their subtlety. I tightened my security protocols, changed passwords, and became hyper-aware of my surroundings. The newsroom was no longer a safe haven, it was a battlefield. Despite the pressure, I kept pushing. The story wasn't just about money, it was about power, and the lengths people would go to protect it. Every lead was a piece of a puzzle that painted a darker picture of Arcadia's financial empire. The stakes were rising, and so was my determination. Late one night, I sat in the dim glow of my laptop, reviewing a spreadsheet that detailed suspicious transactions totaling nearly $50 million over the past 2 years. The numbers didn't lie. This was no simple accounting error, it was a deliberate, sophisticated operation designed to siphon funds without attracting attention. I leaned back, rubbing my temples. The magnitude of what I was uncovering was staggering. If this story broke, it would shake the very foundations of Arcadia Corp, and possibly the industry at large. But I wasn't alone. I had a small circle of trusted colleagues helping me navigate the legal and ethical minefield. We communicated in code and met in safe locations to share findings and strategize. The threats escalated. My laptop was hacked, files mysteriously deleted, and sources started pulling away, scared for their own safety. It was clear someone was watching, waiting for me to slip. But every attempt to intimidate only fueled my resolve. I knew the truth had to come out, no matter the cost. One morning, as I arrived at the office, a colleague handed me a note slipped under my door. It was brief and chilling: "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." I folded it carefully and tucked it into my folder. This was no longer just a story. It was a fight. I called my editor, who listened quietly as I laid out everything I had uncovered so far. He warned me about the risks but gave me his full support. "We'll back you, Jordan. Just be smart." That backing meant the world to me. I wasn't just chasing a scoop, I was holding a powerful corporation accountable, exposing a hidden world of deceit that few dared to confront. The work was exhausting and dangerous, but I was in too deep to turn back now. In the weeks that followed, I balanced newsroom deadlines with covert meetings, data analysis, and endless phone calls to sources who risked everything to speak out. I learned that Arcadia's financial web was tangled with political connections and shell companies scattered across continents. The deeper I went, the more I realized the story wasn't just about money, it was about corruption on a scale that threatened public trust and safety. The subtle threats evolved into overt attempts to discredit me. Anonymous blogs surfaced, painting me as a conspiracy theorist chasing fantasies. My professional reputation was under attack, and some colleagues began to distance themselves, wary of the fallout. It was isolating, but I reminded myself why I started. One evening, while going through a pile of documents, I found a scanned memo, internal, marked confidential, detailing a meeting where executives discussed moving funds under the guise of Project Innovation. The memo was signed by a high-ranking finance officer whose name I recognized from previous reports on corporate fraud. This was the break I needed. I printed the memo and placed it alongside the other documents in my folder. I looked around my small apartment, the walls closing in as the weight of the investigation pressed down on me. I was no longer just an observer, I was a target in a high-stakes game. But I refused to be silenced. The next morning, I drafted an outline for a preliminary report, carefully balancing what I could publish without jeopardizing the investigation or the safety of my sources. The story was only beginning. The world needed to know what lay beneath Arcadia's glossy exterior, and I was the one who would tell it. As I hit send on an encrypted message to my closest ally within the newsroom, I paused. The path ahead was uncertain and dangerous, but I was ready. The truth was out there, buried beneath layers of deceit, and I was determined to uncover it, no matter the cost. The pressure didn't just knock, it kicked the door down. The subtle warnings turned into a relentless wave of interference, each one designed to wear me down, to make me question whether digging into Arcadia Corp was worth the storm I was unleashing. It started small. A source who had promised a crucial document suddenly went silent, their phone disconnected without explanation. Then, whispers began circulating through the industry grapevine, painting me as a reckless journalist chasing shadows, a woman blinded by ambition and conspiracy. At first, I brushed it off, chalking it up to the usual smear tactics. But the rumors spread like wildfire, reaching colleagues, friends, and even family. I caught snippets of conversations at the coffee shop and overheard hushed doubts. The isolation was suffocating. Even some of my closest allies hesitated, their faces clouded with worry rather than encouragement. One morning, I walked into the newsroom to find a stack of anonymous letters waiting on my desk. The messages were veiled threats, thinly disguised as advice. Think about what you're doing, not all stones should be turned, some secrets are better left buried. The handwriting was jagged, impatient. The fear they intended to instill had the opposite effect, it sharpened my resolve. But pressure came in quieter forms too. Calls from former contacts became less frequent, with excuses that sounded rehearsed and rehearsed again. I knew someone was watching, cutting off connections before they could bear fruit. Arcadia's reach was deeper than I'd imagined. The corporate PR machine kicked into overdrive. A carefully crafted campaign began to dismantle my credibility piece by piece. Online articles cropped up, questioning my sources, my methods, even my motives. A few trusted friends privately warned me to back off, worried the backlash would be too much to bear. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The stakes had climbed far beyond a simple expose. I realized I was up against a sophisticated operation, one that had money, influence, and a ruthless willingness to protect itself no matter the cost. Arcadia wasn't just hiding financial misdeeds, they were safeguarding a fortress built on deception, and every brick was guarded fiercely. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of interviews and document reviews, I sat in my car, the engine humming softly as I processed the mounting threats. My phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number, "We see you. Stop now." No signature, no name. Just a chilling reminder that I wasn't invisible. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. This wasn't paranoia, it was reality. The story was bigger than I'd anticipated, and the people behind it were watching every move. But fear was a luxury I couldn't afford. In the days that followed, I noticed new layers of obstruction. Sources who had promised to meet vanished without a word. Files on my laptop were corrupted, some of my research inexplicably erased. The IT department launched an investigation, but the intrusions were sophisticated, designed to look like accidents or technical glitches. Someone was meticulously erasing my trail. Meanwhile, the newsroom itself felt colder. The skepticism seeded by the smear campaign crept into editorial meetings. Questions about the story's validity were raised more frequently. It was as if the walls were closing in, and the very institution that should have been my anchor was now a source of unease. But I refused to let doubt take root. I doubled down, cross-referencing every piece of data, verifying every lead multiple times. I reached out to legal experts who specialized in corporate fraud, ensuring that every step I took was airtight. I couldn't let Arcadia's shadowy tactics derail the truth. One afternoon, I met with an old colleague who had connections inside Arcadia's financial department. She was visibly nervous, glancing over her shoulder before sliding a manila envelope across the table. "These are internal emails," she whispered. "They discuss fund transfers disguised as legitimate expenses. They're careful but sloppy in places." Her hands trembled as she spoke, the weight of the risk clear in her eyes. The documents confirmed what I had suspected. Arcadia was running a complex scheme, funneling millions through a web of fake contracts and offshore entities. The scale was staggering, and the implications even more so. But no sooner had I secured this breakthrough than another wave of intimidation hit. Late one night, my apartment was broken into. Nothing valuable was stolen, no electronics, no cash, but my files were rifled through, my notes scattered on the floor. The message was unmistakable: I was being watched, targeted. I reported the break-in to the police, but I knew the chances of identifying the culprits were slim. The sophistication of the operation behind this was beyond the reach of most law enforcement. It was a silent war, fought in shadows and whispers. Despite the threats, I found unexpected strength in a small group of whistleblowers who had quietly begun to reach out. Their courage was humbling. They risked their careers, and more, to provide details that filled in gaps I couldn't reach alone. Together, we pieced together a network of shell companies, fake invoices, and money trails that pointed directly to Arcadia's top executives. The deeper I delved, the clearer it became: this wasn't just about embezzlement. It was a carefully orchestrated system designed to launder money and influence policy through political donations and backdoor lobbying. The tentacles of the scheme stretched into government agencies, regulatory bodies, and even media outlets. Arcadia's power was systemic. The realization hit hard. Exposing this network meant challenging not just a corporation but a nexus of power that could crush anyone in its path. I wasn't just chasing a story, I was up against a well-oiled machine with resources far beyond my own. One afternoon, in a rare moment of quiet, I sat with my editor, laying out the full scope of the investigation. His face was grave, but his support unwavering. "You're going to make enemies," he said. "Powerful enemies. But if anyone can hold them accountable, it's you." I nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders. The stakes were higher than ever, but retreat wasn't an option. As weeks turned into months, the campaign to silence and discredit me intensified. Anonymous threats escalated from emails to phone calls, to unmarked cars lingering near my apartment. Colleagues warned me to be cautious, friends urged me to step back. The isolation was real, but so was the resolve. In quiet moments, I wondered how far Arcadia would go to protect itself. Would they stop at intimidation? Or would they cross lines that couldn't be uncrossed? The thought was chilling, but it steeled my nerves. I reminded myself of the whistleblower's bravery, of the millions of dollars hidden in plain sight, of the public's right to know the truth. This was bigger than me. It was a fight for accountability in a world where money often bought silence. The deeper I looked, the more I understood the magnitude of the challenge. But I also knew that stepping back now would mean surrendering to a corrupt system. I had to push forward, no matter the cost. The story was no longer just a headline, it was a battle against a fortress of power, and I was determined to tear down its walls, one brick at a time. The breakthrough came when I least expected it: a late-night email from an anonymous whistleblower with a single attachment titled, Operation Atlas. I stared at the subject line, my pulse quickening. The file was a labyrinth of documents, spreadsheets, and internal memos that mapped out the intricate layers of Arcadia's $50 million financial scheme. What I held in my hands wasn't just a lead, it was the blueprint of a conspiracy so elaborate it felt surreal. The documents detailed a network of shell companies scattered across offshore tax havens, each designed to funnel money through a series of fake contracts and phantom projects. There were invoices for software development that never happened, payments to consultants who didn't exist, and accounts that seemed to evaporate into thin air. It was a meticulously orchestrated money laundering operation cloaked behind the veneer of legitimate business. As I sifted through the files, a pattern emerged. Arcadia's executives were not just embezzling funds, they were laundering money through a complex web that shielded their tracks at every turn. The scale was staggering, but the real shocker was how deeply embedded this operation was within the company's official financial statements. I knew I couldn't tackle this alone. The stakes were too high, and the risks too great. I reached out to Elena, a seasoned forensic accountant I'd worked with on previous investigations. She was skeptical at first, but as I shared the documents, her skepticism turned to alarm. "This is sophisticated," she said, scrolling through the spreadsheets. "They've layered transactions to create plausible deniability. It's like they built a fortress of lies." Together, we began to decode the financial maze. Elena's expertise turned raw data into a narrative of corruption, exposing how millions were siphoned off through shell companies with innocuous names, Miratech Solutions, Viridian Holdings, and others that sounded like legitimate firms but existed only on paper. The more we uncovered, the clearer it became that Arcadia's executives were complicit at every level. Internal memos revealed board meetings where strategies to disguise these transactions were openly discussed. One email chain detailed how the CFO instructed the finance team to ensure all documentation passes audit scrutiny, despite knowing the underlying deals were fraudulent. I shared these findings cautiously with my editor, who understood the gravity of the situation. We agreed that before going public, I needed to build a coalition, a network of insiders, legal experts, and trusted colleagues who could help validate and protect the story. Reaching out was a calculated risk. I contacted a former Arcadia employee, Mark, who had left the company under suspicious circumstances. His guarded demeanor spoke of fear and unresolved anger. Over coffee in a quiet cafe, he handed me a USB drive containing internal emails and scanned documents that corroborated much of what I had uncovered. "People inside know what's going on," Mark whispered. "But they're scared. The higher-ups don't just fire you, they ruin you." I felt the weight of his words settle in my chest. This wasn't just a story about numbers, it was about real people trapped in a system designed to silence dissent. To fortify our position, I enlisted the help of a legal team specializing in corporate whistleblower protections. They reviewed all materials, advising on how to handle source confidentiality and potential legal pushback. Every step was deliberate. One misstep could unravel the entire investigation or put lives at risk. Meanwhile, I maintained contact with my whistleblower network, who fed me tips and documents in encrypted messages. Our meetings became a clandestine dance, safe houses, burner phones, and coded language. The threat of exposure loomed constantly, but the urgency to reveal the truth outweighed the fear. One afternoon, Elena called me with news that sent a chill down my spine. "I found a paper trail," she said, her voice tight. "It links the shell companies directly to Arcadia's senior management. There's a memorandum outlining how the funds were to be used for strategic acquisitions, but the money ended up in personal accounts." This was the smoking gun. The evidence connected the dots between the faceless shell companies and the executives who ordered the transfers. It was the kind of proof that could bring down a corporate empire. But with that proof came new dangers. Shortly after this discovery, my email was flooded with phishing attempts and malware disguised as legal documents. My phone rang with silence on the other end. I found my car parked far from my apartment one evening, a faint scent of gasoline lingering in the night air, a clear warning. I doubled down on security, encrypting all communications and limiting physical meetings. The line between professional and personal life blurred as I became hypervigilant, watching shadows and second-guessing every knock on the door. Despite the mounting threats, the investigation pressed on. I compiled a dossier detailing the entire scheme, the shell companies, the fraudulent contracts, the executives' complicity, and the money trail leading to personal enrichment. Each page was a testament to the painstaking work and the courage of those willing to speak out. I began drafting a comprehensive exposé, knowing it would shake the foundations of Arcadia Corporation. But before releasing the story, I needed to ensure the safety of my sources and the integrity of the evidence. We coordinated with trusted legal counsel to prepare for the inevitable backlash. Then came the moment that validated everything, the leak of an internal audit report, anonymously sent to me by someone inside Arcadia's finance department. The report confirmed the discrepancies we had uncovered, highlighting irregularities in fiscal reporting and recommending a full investigation. Holding that report felt like a victory, but I knew it was only the beginning. The fortress of deception was cracking, but the fight to bring it down was far from over. In the quiet moments between meetings and data analysis, I reflected on the journey so far. The alliances forged in secrecy, the risks taken, and the relentless pursuit of a truth that many wanted to remain buried. It wasn't just a story anymore, it was a mission. As I prepared to take the next steps, I felt a mixture of anticipation and dread. Exposing Arcadia's financial labyrinth would invite retaliation, but it would also shine a light on corruption that had festered too long. The pieces were in place. The network of whistleblowers, the forensic evidence, the legal safeguards, all converged toward a single goal: to dismantle the scheme and hold the powerful accountable. I looked at the folder on my desk, thick with documents and digital files, and knew the road ahead would be treacherous. But with every layer uncovered, the truth edged closer to the surface, and I was ready to bring it into the light. Every step forward felt like walking a tightrope stretched over a chasm. The deeper we delved into Arcadia's tangled web, the more dangerous it became. Elena and I spent long nights in a dimly lit conference room, surrounded by stacks of printed documents and glowing screens. Our team meticulously combed through financial records, cross-referencing every transaction, every email, every timestamp, looking for the one thing that could withstand scrutiny in court, and the court of public opinion. We weren't just gathering evidence, we were building an unassailable fortress of truth. The first sign of resistance came almost immediately. Our secure communications were compromised. Encrypted messages failed to send, and encrypted phone calls dropped without explanation. We switched platforms, moved meetings to different locations, and adopted new protocols. But the attempts to sabotage our operation only intensified. One morning, I arrived at a meeting spot to find the cafe unusually quiet. Elena was already there, eyes scanning the room nervously. She handed me a USB drive and whispered, "This contains audio recordings from a confidential meeting between Arcadia's CFO and several executives. They discussed the money trail and how to cover it up." My hands trembled as I plugged the drive into a secure laptop. The voices were unmistakable, calm, calculated, discussing fake invoices, shell companies, and plans to intimidate whistleblowers. Hearing them confess in their own words was chilling. It was the smoking gun we needed. But possession of this evidence made us targets. Days later, one of our key whistleblowers vanished without a trace. Mark, the former employee who had been so vital, stopped responding to messages. His disappearance sent a ripple of fear through our network. We had no proof of foul play, but the timing was too suspicious to ignore. The stakes had never felt higher. We redoubled our efforts to protect sources and secure evidence. Our meetings became more secretive, long drives to remote locations, burner phones exchanged in crowded public spaces, and coded language to mask our conversations. Every interaction felt like a gamble. Our investigative team grew quietly, bringing in legal experts and cybersecurity professionals to shield us from attacks. We developed a system to back up files in multiple secure locations, ensuring that no single breach could destroy months of work. Amid the chaos, I began to notice the toll the investigation was taking on me. Sleep was scarce, and paranoia crept in like a persistent shadow. I caught myself double-checking locks, scanning reflections in windows, and flinching at unexpected noises. But I refused to give in. The evidence was mounting. Financial records showed millions funneled into accounts under false names. Emails detailed how Arcadia's executives manipulated auditors and regulators. The audio recordings revealed a culture of impunity and calculated deception. Yet, despite the mounting proof, Arcadia's grip remained strong. The company unleashed a barrage of misinformation, flooding social media with fake accounts casting doubt on my credibility. They hired private investigators to follow me, their cars tailing me on late-night drives. Anonymous threats escalated to direct confrontations. Once, a man in a suit blocked my path outside the office, warning me to stop poking the bear. But I wasn't alone. Whistleblowers continued to provide crucial information, even as the risks grew. Their courage was humbling, fueling my determination. Each piece of evidence they shared was a lifeline in the darkness. To protect them, I created a secure Dropbox system, allowing sources to upload documents anonymously. The technology was complex, but necessary. One wrong move could expose someone to devastating consequences. The most harrowing moment came when an insider sent me a recording of a meeting where Arcadia's legal team plotted to discredit me personally. They planned to leak doctored emails, fabricate evidence, and launch a character assassination campaign. It was a blueprint for destruction designed to silence the story before it saw the light of day. I shared this with my editor, who immediately called for heightened security measures. The newsroom adapted quickly, reinforcing IT defenses and limiting access to sensitive files. We were under siege, but the walls held. Meanwhile, I coordinated with trusted colleagues to verify every claim, cross-examining documents and testimonies until nothing could be questioned. The story was shaping into a comprehensive exposé, a narrative that laid bare the full extent of Arcadia's corruption. Yet, with every step closer to unveiling the truth, the danger escalated. One evening, as I returned home, I found my apartment door ajar. Heart pounding, I entered cautiously. Nothing was stolen, but my workspace was ransacked. Papers torn, files scattered. The message was clear: I was being watched, and they wanted me to know. I called the police, filed a report, but deep down, I knew this was more than a break-in, it was intimidation. Determined not to be cowed, I reached out to a network of investigative journalists for advice and support. We shared resources, strategies, and solidarity. The investigation had become bigger than me, it was a collective fight for accountability. In the following weeks, our evidence grew more damning. We uncovered financial flows to political campaigns, ties to lobbying firms, and tactics to manipulate regulatory agencies. The scope was breathtaking, revealing a system where corruption fed on itself. My team prepared for the inevitable fallout. Legal counsel reviewed every line of the forthcoming report, anticipating counterattacks and lawsuits. We developed contingencies for protecting sources and ourselves. Despite the tension, moments of progress kept us going. A whistleblower provided internal video footage showing executives celebrating a successful cover-up. Another shared copies of falsified audit reports submitted to regulators. Each revelation was a step closer to exposing the truth. Still, the threats persisted. Cars followed me home, strange packages appeared at my doorstep, and anonymous calls became routine. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. But I reminded myself why I started this journey, not for recognition or glory, but because the public deserved to know what was hidden behind Arcadia's polished facade. The final pieces of the puzzle were coming together. The story was no longer just a series of allegations, it was a documented, irrefutable account of systemic fraud and corruption. As I prepared to bring the investigation into the light, I knew the battle was far from over. The perpetrators would fight back with everything they had. But armed with truth and a network of allies, I was ready to face whatever came next. Because sometimes, the only way to break through the darkness is to shine a light so bright it can't be ignored. The morning of the press conference, the city was cloaked in a heavy fog that seemed to seep into my bones. I sat behind a cluttered desk in a small conference room, the weight of months of investigation pressing down like a stone in my chest. Around me, a handful of trusted colleagues and legal advisors moved quietly, finalizing the presentation that would unravel Arcadia's carefully constructed empire of lies. I ran my fingers over the stack of documents, a dossier so thick it felt like carrying the weight of the world. Every page, every audio clip, every email was a thread woven into a tapestry of corruption, fraud, and betrayal. This was more than a story, it was a reckoning. The room buzzed with nervous energy. Cameras were set up, journalists from across the country gathered, and representatives from regulatory agencies took their seats. The air was thick with anticipation, and a hint of danger. When I stepped up to the podium, the fog outside felt like a metaphor for the murky depths we were about to expose. I cleared my throat and began, voice steady despite the adrenaline raging through me. Today, we reveal the truth behind Arcadia Corporation's $50 million financial scheme, a network of deception that has defrauded investors, manipulated regulators, and undermined public trust. I laid out the evidence piece by piece, the shell companies, the fake contracts, the offshore accounts, and the executives who orchestrated it all. I played excerpts from the audio recordings, executives discussing their covert plans with cold calculation. Screens behind me displayed internal memos and audit reports confirming the fraudulent activity. The room was silent, the weight of the revelations sinking in. Questions came fast and sharp, reporters digging deeper, legal experts probing the implications. But the narrative was airtight, the evidence undeniable. The impact was immediate. Within hours, the story dominated headlines worldwide. Regulatory bodies announced formal investigations, and law enforcement agencies opened cases against Arcadia's top executives. The company's stock plummeted as investors reacted to the unfolding scandal. I watched as the carefully built facade of Arcadia crumbled, piece by piece. The executives who once seemed untouchable were suddenly under scrutiny, their reputations shredded by the relentless tide of truth. But the fallout wasn't just corporate. Whistleblowers who had risked everything found their voices amplified, their courage recognized. Legal protections were enacted swiftly, shielding those who came forward and encouraging others to speak out. The public responded with outrage and demands for accountability. The scandal sparked debates about corporate governance and regulatory oversight, igniting calls for reform. The story I had chased for so long had become a catalyst for change. Yet, amid the triumph, I felt no gloating. The cost had been high: personal sacrifices, fractured relationships, and the ever-present shadow of danger. But standing there, witnessing justice begin to take shape, I knew it had been worth it. Arcadia's downfall was a testament to the power of relentless investigation and the courage to confront corruption. It was a reminder that no empire, no matter how mighty, could withstand the light of truth. As the press conference ended and the room emptied, I packed my notes and looked out the window. The fog was lifting, revealing a city waking to a new day, a day where justice had edged closer, thanks to the voices that refused to be silenced. The story was far from over, but this chapter marked a turning point. And I was ready for whatever came next. The days after the press conference unfolded like a whirlwind, a relentless storm of investigations, resignations, and legal maneuvers that swept through Arcadia Corporation. The company's towering reputation, once untouchable, crumbled under the weight of the revelations. Board members resigned in droves, the CEO stepped down amid mounting pressure, and federal authorities launched a comprehensive probe that promised to peel back every layer of the corrupt empire. Inside the newsroom, the atmosphere was electric yet tense. I balanced interviews and briefings with moments of quiet reflection, acutely aware of the personal cost the investigation had exacted. The late nights, the constant vigilance, the isolation, it all weighed heavily. Yet, there was a sense of vindication that coursed through me, a quiet triumph born from the knowledge that the truth was finally being reckoned with. Legal reforms followed swiftly. Lawmakers introduced bills targeting corporate fraud and enhancing protections for whistleblowers, spurred by the public outcry ignited by the exposé. Policy discussions filled the airwaves, and regulatory agencies pledged to overhaul oversight mechanisms to prevent such abuses from recurring. The scandal had become a catalyst, not just for Arcadia's collapse, but for systemic change. Whistleblowers who had once hidden in the shadows stepped forward, their bravery now celebrated rather than punished. Their testimonies informed investigations and fortified legal cases. I kept in touch with many of them, offering support and ensuring their stories were told with dignity and respect. Professionally, the investigation elevated my standing in journalism circles. Invitations to panels, awards, and speaking engagements followed, yet I remained grounded. The acclaim was gratifying, but it was the impact, the lives changed, the corruption exposed, that truly mattered. Personally, the journey was more complicated. Relationships strained under the pressure, some friends drifted away, uncomfortable with the spotlight or wary of association. I grappled with lingering fears and the knowledge that powerful adversaries still lurked in the background. But I found solace in a tight-knit circle of trusted colleagues and loved ones who stood by me unconditionally. Returning to the newsroom felt like reclaiming a piece of normalcy. The familiar hum of activity, the camaraderie of a team united by purpose, it was a balm for the soul. I dove back into reporting, determined to continue shining light on stories that mattered, aware now more than ever of the stakes involved. The Arcadia saga served as a stark reminder of the fragile balance between power and accountability. It underscored the essential role of investigative journalism as a watchdog in a democratic society, a force capable of challenging even the most formidable institutions. As I reviewed the final pieces of the investigation archived in my files, I recognized that the story's impact extended far beyond headlines. It had sparked conversations, inspired reforms, and empowered individuals to stand up against wrongdoing. Yet, the journey had also taught me resilience, the ability to persist despite threats, doubts, and setbacks. Courage, the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths and face powerful adversaries. And above all, the conviction that truth is worth fighting for. The path ahead remained uncertain. There would be new battles, fresh stories demanding attention, and ongoing efforts to ensure that justice prevailed. But I was ready. In the quiet moments after the storm, as the dust settled and the city moved forward, I found strength in knowing that the relentless pursuit of truth could indeed make a difference. And that was a victory worth every sacrifice. The quiet that settled after the storm was strange, unnerving even. The relentless buzz of investigation, the adrenaline-fueled days, the constant shadow of danger, all faded into a stillness that left room for reflection, but also for reckoning. I sat alone in the dim light of my apartment, the city's distant hum a reminder that life moved on, indifferent to the battles fought in its name. I thought about the cost, the fractured friendships, the sleepless nights, the moments when fear gnawed at the edges of my resolve. Exposing Arcadia's corruption wasn't just a professional victory, it was a personal crucible. Watching powerful people topple under the weight of truth was satisfying, but it came with scars that wouldn't heal overnight. Still, there was a stubborn hope lodged deep inside me. A belief that resilience mattered, that pushing through threats and doubts, standing firm in the face of intimidation, was a necessity in a world where power often sought to silence the inconvenient. I reflected on the courage of the whistleblowers, the quiet heroes who risked everything to bring the truth to light. Their bravery was the heartbeat of the entire story. Without them, the fortress of lies would have remained unbreached. They reminded me that holding power accountable wasn't just about uncovering facts, it was about amplifying voices society often tried to ignore. The experience forged in me a sharper understanding of the fragile dance between power and accountability. It underscored the essential role of investigative journalism, not as a mere profession, but as a pillar of justice. We shine a light where darkness thrives, not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. I thought about the future, aware that vigilance would be constant. Corruption doesn't disappear overnight, it mutates, shifts, and sometimes hides behind new facades. The fight for transparency and truth is ongoing, a marathon rather than a sprint. Yet, I found strength in the knowledge that even the most entrenched systems can be challenged. That precision, patience, and persistence, the tools of a careful investigator, can pierce the most impenetrable veils. That truth, when pursued relentlessly, is the sharpest weapon of all. As I prepared to return to the newsroom, to new stories and fresh battles, I carried with me the lessons etched in this journey: resilience in adversity, courage in the face of fear, and the unyielding conviction that exposing corruption is not just an act of reporting, but one of profound responsibility. The path ahead was uncertain, but I was ready. Because in the end, truth is not a destination, it's a relentless pursuit. And that pursuit is what keeps the wheels of justice turning. If you love the story, like the video and subscribe.